Javier Jimenez. Antofagasta, a coastal city in northern Chile, was bustling as usual in August 2022. Among its vibrant community was a rising social media star named Javiera Jimenez, whose energy was infectious both online and in person. At just 23 years old, she had built a lively presence. But Javiera's bright light was extinguished on August 26, 2022. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions for her family, friends, and investigators. That morning, Javiera told her family she was heading out on a trip to Calama, a mining town in the middle of the desert. Concern turned to fear when she failed to check in that evening. Calls went unanswered, and her usually active social media feed fell silent. Panicked, her mother began calling friends, but no one had heard from her. As days passed, the mystery deepened. Local news outlets picked up the story, and Javiera's fans flooded social media with hashtags demanding answers. The investigation began with a police report filed on August 26, 2022. Javiera's family informed officers that she had left home that morning with her 6-month boyfriend, Andres Sutter, for the trip to Calama. The reason for the trip remained unclear. Some suggested it was simply a casual outing, while others believed it might be connected to Javiera's work as a promoter and a possible business deal. Detectives from the Antofagasta branch of the Policia de Investigations began reconstructing her final hours. Witnesses recalled that she appeared cheerful that morning, though somewhat preoccupied. A friend remembered Javiera mentioning she was excited for the trip, but didn't explain further. Police also questioned neighbors and vendors to see if anyone had noticed her or Sutter before they left town. Several people reported seeing a white pickup truck, later confirmed to belong to Sutter, near the house where Javiera had been staying. Andres Sutter was quickly identified as the last person seen with Javiera. Some people referred to Sutter as Wada. He was 23 years old, from Calama, and did not hold a steady job. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video, which immediately raised suspicions for Javiera's family. Relatives like her mother, Gladys, had never trusted him fully, believing his behavior to be odd. On August 27th, one day after Javiera disappeared, police summoned Sutter for questioning. From the start, his account was shaky. He claimed that he and Javiera drove to Calama in his truck, but along the way, a bag fell out. According to him, this sparked an argument. He said he left Javiera by the roadside near the city entrance while he went back to retrieve the bag. When he returned, she was gone. Sutter told police he assumed she had either wandered off or been taken by someone. Officers immediately found his version of events suspicious. Why would he abandon her in such a remote area? Why didn't he call her right away? Even Gladys rejected his explanation, telling reporters she doubted him because he never asked her or anyone else where Javiera was. He didn't even seem worried, she later remarked with skepticism. During questioning, Sutter gave only limited details, repeating his story without offering much else. Detectives noted his composure. He appeared calm, almost detached, showing no real signs of distress. This raised further red flags and pushed investigators to probe deeper into his background. Their inquiries uncovered ties to a group in Sutter's area linked to copper theft, a lucrative crime in Chile's mining-dominated north. Even though there was no direct proof that Javiera was connected to these activities, the possible link made the investigation more complicated. Could her disappearance have been tied to Sutter's questionable acquaintances? A massive search was launched for Javiera. Alongside the Carabineros, Chile's national police, the PDI combed the stretch of Highway B, 400 that cuts through the barren Atacama Desert between Antofagasta and Calama. Search teams worked the sandy terrain, keeping in mind that bodies had previously been hidden in the wilderness of this region. They checked roadside rest stops, inspected abandoned structures, and even explored deserted mine sites. Aerial patrols were conducted to spot anything unusual, like scraps of clothing or tire marks. Volunteers from Antofagasta joined in, with the operation organized by Javiera's family and amplified by online campaigns from her followers. Posters bearing her photo appeared throughout the city, from bus stops to street kiosks. Witness interviews offered glimpses of Javiera's final movements, but yielded few solid leads. Around noon on August 26th, a gas station worker on the outskirts of Antofagasta reported seeing a white truck matching Sutter's vehicle. He couldn't confirm if Javiera was inside, but the timing aligned. Another witness, a truck driver traveling the B400, recalled seeing a couple quarreling by a car that day, though he couldn't identify them. Later that afternoon, Javiera's phone, an essential piece of evidence, was switched off. Its last signal placed it somewhere along the highway, but Sutter's phone records showed him heading back toward Antofagasta after the supposed bag incident, contradicting his claim of returning quickly. Over the following weeks, the investigation intensified. On September 2, 2022, Sutter was arrested once more by the PDI, this time for obstructing the police in their investigation. Officers noticed inconsistencies in his account, and he initially refused to hand over his phone for forensic review. When investigators finally accessed it, they uncovered audio files and text messages linking him to a copper theft network led by a man named Jonathan Olav. Authorities suspected Sutter was withholding crucial information about Javiera to protect himself or others. He was released under conditions requiring him to check in at the PDI station every 2 weeks and forbidding him from leaving Chile. Yet by September 18, 2022, he had vanished. The PDI later confirmed he had illegally crossed the border into Bolivia. Interpol issued a red notice, sparking an international search for him. His escape deepened suspicions. If he was innocent, why did he flee? Gladys and her family kept the pressure on by organizing vigils and speaking to the press. In October 2022, when asked by reporters, Gladys declared, "I don't believe his story. He knows more than he's admitting." The police agreed, sharing her frustration. They questioned members of Sutter's circle, including his mother, who insisted she had no idea where he was. Investigators also probed Javiera's personal life, asking her friends if she had mentioned threats or problems. Some noted she had become less open in the months before her disappearance, though most said she hadn't. Was she concealing something, or had she become entangled in someone else's dangerous schemes? The copper theft connection was critical, and investigators wondered if Javiera had uncovered something dangerous. As the months passed without any trace of her, the community's hope began to fade. It seemed as though the vast, unforgiving desert had swallowed her whole. Still, the police refused to give up. They pursued leads into Bolivia, where rumors placed Sutter in Santa Cruz. Locals and social media users kept sharing details about Gladys's daughter, urging anyone with knowledge to speak up. The PDI worked closely with Bolivian authorities to track Sutter's movements. Piece by piece, the clues circled back to that grim day on Highway B400 and the man who drove away, leaving Javiera behind. What had really happened on that desolate stretch? And what was Sutter running from? By November 2022, the search had extended well beyond the Antofagasta-Calama route. Teams scoured remote areas and revisited old leads. Forensic evidence, especially data from Sutter's phone, revealed unusual activity after the supposed suitcase incident. Investigators also reviewed security camera footage along Highway B400, hoping to trace his white pickup truck. Then came a breakthrough. A miner reported disturbed ground near an abandoned mining road. On November 12, 2022, he told police he had seen tire tracks and what looked like freshly dug soil off a dirt road near Sierra Gorda, roughly 60 kilometers from Calama. It wasn't much, but in a case with so few clues, it was enough to push the investigation forward. On November 15, 2022, the PDI returned to the site with forensic specialists and cadaver dogs. The location was desolate, marked only by rocky outcrops and rusting mining equipment. The kind of place where the desert could swallow its secrets for decades. After hours of painstaking excavation, the team made a grim discovery. A shallow grave, barely a meter deep, contained human remains. As the body was carefully unearthed, fragments of clothing surfaced, a black top, jeans, and a bracelet with a distinctive pattern. Later, Javiera's mother confirmed it as her daughter's. Every detail, soil samples, disturbed earth, and items buried nearby, was catalogued for forensic analysis. It was a heartbreaking turning point. 81 days had passed since Javiera vanished, and now her body was on its way to the Servicio Medico Legal in Antofagasta for identification and autopsy. Decomposition, after nearly 3 months in the Atacama, made the process slow and difficult. On November 20, 2022, DNA analysis using samples from Gladys confirmed what the family dreaded most. The remains were Javiera's. Their faint hope that she might be alive was crushed. Gladys described the moment as feeling like a knife piercing her heart, but vowed to keep pursuing justice. With this confirmation, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide. The autopsy, completed on November 22, 2022, revealed key details. Javiera had suffered extensive injuries. Most damning was a gunshot wound to the chest, with the bullet still lodged in her ribcage. This single piece of evidence transformed the case into a full-scale murder probe, raising urgent questions about who pulled the trigger and why. It was determined that the cause of death was homicide, resulting from massive internal bleeding caused by the gunshot wound. The forensic report noted the absence of prolonged struggle marks, suggesting the act occurred swiftly. Traces of sand and mineral dust embedded in her clothing matched the Sierra Gorda location, indicating she was likely killed and buried there shortly after disappearing. The lack of defensive wounds raised troubling questions. Had she been ambushed? Additionally, blood residue was found in her hair during the autopsy, though no skull fractures were present. This suggested she may have endured a light blow to the head before being fatally shot. Attention shifted back to Sutter's truck, which had been confiscated after his escape to Bolivia. In early December 2022, forensic testing uncovered blood in the truck bed, later confirmed through DNA analysis to belong to Javiera. The volume was significant, implying she had been transported after sustaining injuries. Investigators concluded Sutter likely drove her body to the burial site, an assumption reinforced by tire tracks near the grave that matched his vehicle. Soil samples collected from the truck's wheels contained the same mineral composition as Sierra Gorda's terrain, cementing the forensic link. This breakthrough escalated the urgency of the case. The PDI intensified their pursuit of Sutter, coordinating with Bolivian authorities through Interpol. At the same time, they re-interviewed key witnesses, including friends who had seen Javiera with Sutter on August 26. One recalled a heated argument between the pair just days earlier, a telling sign that the relationship was under mounting strain. The police looked into whether this tension had anything to do with Sutter's ties to a copper theft ring led by Jonathan Olive, a person who had come up in old cases. Messages that were taken from Sutter's phone before his flight showed that he was very angry when he found out that Javier and Olive might be dating. Was this a reason? The PDI didn't close this case, but instead focused on hard proof and avoided guesswork. The community's reaction was strong. Hundreds of people came together to remember Javiera at vigils that sprung up all over Antofagasta. The PDI had to give answers because Gladys became a loud supporter and went on the local news to demand that they be held responsible. With the discovery site blocked off, it became a hub for investigators who kept looking for more evidence, like a weapon or more personal things. But the desert was harsh and wind had blown away a lot of the proof on the ground. Sutter was caught by Bolivian police in Santa Cruz's Barrio Autonomia on January 4, 2024, after being on the run for almost 16 months. The arrest, which was revealed by Eduardo del Castillo, Bolivia's Minister of Government, was a big step forward thanks to a tip from Gladys's constant pleas for help on social media. On January 5, 2024, Sutter was sent back to Chile. His life showed that he was a young man who had a lot of problems. Andres Sutter Area, better known as Wada, was born in Calama, a mining hub 200 kilometers from Antofagasta. She grew up in an area where copper theft was a big business in the criminal world. Court records show that Sutter was involved in 2 violent heists in 2022. In May, he and 5 others, wearing military-style gear and carrying guns, stole copper cathodes worth 60 million Chilean pesos from a Ferrocarriles and Topagasta, Bolivia train. In July, they went after a truck on Ruta Cheno Norte, carrying 250 million Chilean pesos worth of copper. The total loss was about $350,000 US dollars. He was willing to use violence in these crimes, as he and his crew beat and held workers during the thefts. There was more to Sutter's relationship with Javiera than just love. Their relationship, which began in early 2022 and lasted 6 months, was tense. Especially after Javiera found out about his criminal actions. Another layer came to light. Sutter is said to have attacked Olav, paralyzing him out of anger over a rumored affair with Javiera. Sutter went to court on January 6, 2024 after being extradited. The court charged him with killing Javier Jimenez and 2 counts of stealing with violence. During the trial, Sutter was described as defiant, and Gladys noted that he showed no remorse for his actions. His own words, however, were shocking. Sutter admitted to burying Javiera's body in the desert, but insisted her death was an accident and that he was not responsible. He even provided the exact coordinates of the Sierra Gorda site where her body was discovered. His lawyer, Victor Contreras, portrayed this as substantial cooperation, almost like a get-out-of-jail-free move. Contreras, known for defending drug traffickers, argued that Sutter was not the killer and suggested someone else was involved, though he offered no evidence. When pressed by investigators, Sutter repeated his version. After a fight over a dropped bag, he left Javiera on the B400 highway, and when he returned, she was already dead. He claimed he buried her out of fear of being implicated, especially since his phone contained incriminating messages about copper theft. But when questioned about the gunshot wound and the blood found in his truck, his answers were vague. He denied shooting her and suggested an unknown attacker could have intervened. Gladys, devastated but resolute, rejected his story, declaring, "He shot her, buried her, and ran. He knows exactly what he did." Prosecutors supported her, pointing out that Sutter's escape to Bolivia and his violent history made his claim of an accidental death highly implausible. The court agreed, ruling that he posed both a flight risk and a danger to public safety, and ordered 90 days of preventive detention. On November 4, 2024, Sutter was convicted on 2 counts of robbery with violence and threats. These crimes took place in May 2022 on a train and in July 2022 on a truck, both targeting copper cathodes. The court sentenced Sutter to 16 years in prison, a ruling later upheld by the Corte Suprema in January 2025. The evidence was overwhelming. Messages on his phone revealed details of his thefts, showing him armed and flaunting cash. His associate, Jonathan Olav, received a 20-year sentence, while 5 others were handed terms ranging from 8 to 11 years. Altogether, the gang was sentenced to 91 years behind bars. As of July 2025, however, Sutter's murder case remains under investigation, with no hearing date yet scheduled. Gladys voiced her frustration in a December 2024 interview, declaring, "Every day without a verdict is another day without peace." The PDI continues to comb through Sutter's phone for additional texts or calls that might shed light on what happened on August 26, 2022. Investigators are also examining whether Olav's crew had any involvement, though no evidence supports Contreras' theory of a third party. The toll on Javiera's family has been immense. On May 31, 2024, a large crowd gathered to mourn the loss of Antofagasta's shining star. Financial struggles have forced the family to seek community support as they continue their fight for justice. Sutter's appeal in the copper theft case, filed in December 2024, was rejected, ensuring he remains imprisoned. Yet the question surrounding Javiera's fate continues to haunt everyone. Moving on to the next case. Jordan and Tyler Pratt. In today's video, we're exploring a story so terrifying no film could ever surpass it. This case is full of twists, shocking events, and a darkness that feels nearly unreal. Yet every detail of it is real. Let's begin. Lucy, Caitlin, and Jane, the triplets, had everything they needed for happiness. But one of the girls eventually grew bored, which was destined to end badly for her. Lucy Lee, Caitlin Lee, and Jane Lee were born in China in 1995. There were 3 of them. Lucy, whose birth name was Yun Lu, was the eldest because she arrived 5 minutes before Caitlin and Jane. Their parents decided to relocate to Toronto, Canada, when the sisters were still very young. They left the children behind in China for the time being. In truth, the triplets were raised by close relatives until they turned 7 years old. The girls reunited with their parents after they had already been living there for a while. Once the family was back together in Canada, the triplets gained a younger brother and sister. Their father excelled in his profession. He operated a driving school for Chinese immigrants. But Lucy's mother, Hong Wei, or Winnie as her friends and family knew her, was the most ambitious and accomplished. Her business thrived. Winnie owned a company called Resbound International that handled assets. The firm's main customers were Chinese Canadians. Through the business, people purchased life insurance policies, which allowed them to transfer money from abroad without having to pay taxes on it. Winnie swiftly became well known as a businesswoman in Canada. She delivered speeches at numerous conferences and met with several of the country's most prominent figures. A photograph of Winnie with both Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ontario Premier Doug Ford has surfaced. Winnie succeeded in building strong relationships with many members of the elite, and she ultimately rose to become a highly influential and powerful individual herself. People regarded her not merely as wealthy, but as a multimillionaire. The children grew up gradually, but their mother remained occupied constantly, so they rarely had much time with her. The businesswoman's schedule was extremely demanding, and when she did manage household duties, she was very strict with her children and son. The mother ensured that everyone adhered to the rules and excelled in school. Winnie was not cruel. She simply wanted each of her children to succeed and prosper in life, just as she had. The girls learned from her how to strive for excellence. They were not allowed to play or spend time with friends because they were required to complete chores around the house. In this way, Lucy, Caitlin, Jane, and the two younger children learned how to manage significant responsibilities at a very young age. The triplets founded their own charity at age 13 to support young women and children. It was named the Canadian Youth Funding Association. There was nothing Winnie wouldn't do to ensure her daughters thrived in life. They often accompanied her to many of the business functions she attended. She was preparing them to one day assume her position at the company. However, not every child accepted these expectations for their lives. Lucy struggled to grasp why her parents believed she was destined to accomplish great things. Winnie was very disappointed that she wasn't the most disciplined student. This became a recurring source of conflict between the eldest daughter and her mother. Lucy thought of herself as a nerd in school. At that time, she had bangs and braces and felt like she would never belong among her peers in her own household, where achievement and knowledge held the highest value. The girl felt as though she did not truly fit in. Lucy encountered Oliver Crawford when she was 14 years old. Oliver was 16 at the time, 2 grades ahead of her. Brady Crawford was born in 1993 in Slovakia. When he was 8 years old, his parents relocated to Canada. The family initially settled in Windsor before moving to Toronto. His was an ordinary life. People did not consider Oliver a bad person, but neither did they see him as particularly admirable. He occasionally got into minor trouble, though that was common for many boys. Lucy and Oliver met in high school and began conversing with one another. They soon entered into a romantic relationship, but it did not last long. The boy pressured the girl to sleep with him, but Lucy was not ready yet. Unwilling to wait for her, he slept with one of her friends instead. Following this betrayal, Lucy's high school relationship ended abruptly. The triplets graduated from high school, and their mother compelled all 3 of them to attend the University of Toronto to study business. It appeared that Winnie had not truly considered what her daughters wanted for their futures, as she had already predetermined their paths. It seemed as though the mother disregarded her children's desires entirely, viewing them instead as successors she was grooming to take her place. The worst part about her approach was that she made the triplets compete against each other. For example, she promised to buy a new car for whichever one earned the best grades. This sometimes strained the sisters' relationships with one another. Lucy performed fairly well in college, and upon finishing, she went to work for her mother in the life insurance company. That was when her difficulties resurfaced. Lucy tried her hardest to live up to her mother's expectations by pursuing major clients, but it appeared she did not perform as well as Winnie had hoped. The girl became extremely anxious whenever she had to handle tasks she was not yet skilled at. Lucy decided to step away from her job and focus on herself for a while. She requested 2 years off from work to travel, explore new experiences, and figure out what she truly wanted in life. This was possible because the family was financially secure. When her mother eventually agreed and allowed all 3 daughters to try different things, she promised to cover all their expenses for 2 years and provided each of the triplets with a monthly allowance of several thousand rupees. Lucy appeared to have been under constant stress throughout her life, always striving to be like her mother. At the same time, her parents were also generous with her. So, how did the Lee children spend all this free time? All 3 chose to become influencers on social media, shaping people's opinions and behaviors through their posts. They created accounts on several platforms under the name Mia Triplets and began sharing a variety of content. The sisters largely saw themselves as role models. They often appeared in photographs wearing underwear and swimsuits. Frequently, they shared pictures with the hashtag ***triplets, which became their signature. The triplets' social media profiles grew larger and more recognized. They amassed 60,000 followers on TikTok and another 40,000 on a separate platform. Although they were not exactly celebrities, they still had a significant following. As the triplets' popularity increased, businesses began reaching out to them with collaboration offers. The sisters received free products and were asked to promote them. They earned between $500 and $1,000 for each post. Thanks to this new lifestyle, one of the sisters, Caitlin, entered beauty pageants such as Miss Toronto, Miss Canada, Miss Intercontinental Canada, and others. She won multiple awards and even achieved second place. Caitlin Lee's rise to fame boosted the triplets' visibility on social media. By 2019, Lucy Lee was 24 years old. Around that time, something significant occurred in her life. Oliver Crawford, the same boy she had briefly dated in high school, reappeared. He was 26 years old now. What had he been doing during those 10 years? After finishing high school, Crawford attempted to pursue a modeling career. His photos appeared on various modeling agency websites at that time. However, Oliver had spent most of the years since he last saw Lucy behind bars. In 2012, when he was 19 years old, Oliver went out drinking with his friend David and David's girlfriend. They mixed different types of alcohol and became heavily intoxicated, unable to think clearly. Around 2 a.m., the girl left them, but the two young men continued drinking heavily. When Oliver finally stepped outside into the fresh air, he chose to drive. However, it turned out that his blood alcohol level was several times above the legal limit. Oliver got behind the wheel, and David, his friend, took the passenger seat. They were both heavily intoxicated without fully realizing what he was doing. Carafa entered the highway and sped dangerously fast. His speed remained too high until something blocked his path. The young man, impaired by alcohol, lost control. At full force, he veered off the road and struck a pole. The crash was severe. The noise, like a plane explosion, was heard by many. The car was nearly split in half. David's seatbelt ripped away from its attachment, which was disastrous. The passenger was thrown from the vehicle and struck a light pole. The boy died instantly as his skull was crushed. Because of his friend's negligence and recklessness, David lost his life. Meanwhile, Oliver miraculously survived the horrific crash, alive and mostly unscathed. He sustained only minor injuries, even though officials later remarked that no one should have survived that collision. He admitted he was in serious trouble and expected prison time since someone had died because of him when he finally realized what had occurred. That is exactly what happened. Carafa was arrested and charged with causing death while driving under the influence. His parents had already returned to Slovakia by then and were required to post his bail. Oliver received a 15-year driving ban and in 2014, a 5-year prison term. Yet incarceration did not change the troubled youth. He continually got into trouble, smuggling items and associating with shady people. Oliver kept being denied parole due to his behavior, so he served the entire sentence. The parole board described Carafa as a young man who believed society's rules did not apply to him and who had an unhealthy sense of entitlement. So Oliver attempted to restart his life in 2019. After completing his sentence, he sought to reconnect with people from his past through social media and stumbled across the triplets' page by chance. He instantly recognized Lucy as his former high school girlfriend. She now appeared stylish and attractive. With her modeling career, Carafa was eager to contact her. When Oliver sent Lucy a message, she was delighted. He still aspired to become a model, something they both shared. He appeared and seemed even more handsome and appealing than during their school years. After considering it, she quickly agreed to go on a date. By their second outing, the young pair's relationship advanced rapidly, and Lucy moved in with Oliver. Winnie, Lucy's mother, was displeased with this decision because she strongly disliked the young man. She believed he was a negative influence on her daughter and was convinced Oliver would lead Lucy down the wrong path. The mother was correct, considering what was to come as a consequence of Lucy's choice. Winnie stopped providing Lucy with financial support. She had been giving the triplets several $1,000s monthly to cover expenses. She stated that Lucy could manage without assistance since she was now living with her boyfriend. At first, Lucy struggled with this change, even though she and her sisters earned money from social media advertisements that had to be divided 3 ways. She was accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle and never having to sacrifice anything. However, the issue was quickly resolved when Oliver began earning significant amounts and could support his girlfriend's needs. The only problem was that he obtained the money through dishonest means. Carafa launched numerous shady ventures after leaving prison. He was determined to become an entrepreneur, a powerful businessman, and a multimillionaire. Over time, he engaged in various schemes, including selling weighted blankets and transporting cars for social media advertisement shoots. Oliver was willing to do anything to acquire wealth, and he succeeded. Their new residence was a 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto, ready soon. Since Oliver had lost his license and was banned from driving for 15 years, Lucy was required to chauffeur him. She helped him transport the cars he dealt with and drove him to all his business appointments. Lucy became involved in every one of her boyfriend's business dealings. People suspected that all of these operations were unlawful. Most likely, Carafa smuggled the foreign vehicles he imported and exported. He dismantled them for parts, transported them, and sold them at a substantial profit. It is often said that if one is not caught, one is not considered a thief. By the spring of 2020, when the pandemic began, Lucy and Oliver had been together for a year. With the world in lockdown, the couple spent much time alone at home. But then Oliver decided it would be enjoyable to travel to Slovakia to visit his parents and afterward tour across Europe, despite the ongoing pandemic. Naturally, he wanted Lucy to accompany him to meet his family. They purchased plane tickets, arrived at the airport, and attempted to board. But due to pandemic restrictions, only Carafa was permitted to return to Slovakia because he possessed dual citizenship. Lucy, however, could not since she was not a Slovak citizen. At the airport, officials informed them that Lucy could board the plane only if she were married to Oliver. Any sensible person would have complied with the rules and canceled the trip. Lucy and Oliver, however, were not sensible. They decided to get married online right there at the airport. During the lockdown, many processes, including marriage documentation, were handled through Zoom. Entering marriage at the airport solely to catch a flight, without prior discussion, was reckless and dangerous. Yet Lucy and Oliver went through with it. They spent several months afterward traveling across Europe. By the end of the summer, they returned to Canada. At that time, Carafa was making plans to expand his business. This was how he encountered Tyler Pratt, with whom he was eager to collaborate. Oliver perceived major opportunities in Tyler and wanted to exploit them, but their dealings did not proceed smoothly with their new acquaintance. Tyler had been born in British Columbia and raised in a large family. He had previously been married and had 2 children. Officially, Tyler played hockey. He was also an entrepreneur like Oliver, running a diamond production company and a supplement business. In reality, however, he was trafficking illegal drugs on a private scale. He was not a small-time dealer, but a significant figure. Pratt oversaw the importation of massive quantities of white powder from abroad and distributed them to lower-level sellers. As a result, he accumulated substantial wealth. Reports claimed he could sell drugs worth $1 million in just one day. Tyler was very wealthy. In 2020, Pratt separated from his wife, though he continued to maintain contact with his children. Despite his criminal activity, people said he was a devoted father. He never missed a vacation or his children's birthdays. He devoted much attention to them and spent all his free time with them. In 2020, Tyler met a woman named Jordan Romano. He was around 40 years old then. She was raised in Ontario and encountered Pratt when she was about 25. For work, the woman performed exotic dance. Their relationship advanced rapidly. Soon, Jordan left her job because her boyfriend covered all her needs. The couple lived extravagantly with designer clothing, luxury cars, lavish vacations, and other expensive pleasures. Jordan and Tyler chose to start a life together in the summer of 2020. They got engaged and planned to get married soon so they could start a real family. Tyler's main goal was to stop the criminal business, live an honest life, and turn into a law-abiding businessman. Jordan said that they just wanted to be a normal couple and get away from the bad things that come with selling drugs. But everyone has to pay for their sins at some point. And in July 2020, Pratt and Oliver Carafa were brought together by fate. Someone suggested that Tyler get in touch with Oliver when he was looking for an honest businessman among his friends to put his money in. The men planned to meet for a business dinner to learn more about each other. Carafa was a lovely person who could get people to agree with her. He talked to his new friend all night about his big plans, reassured him that his business was legal, and bragged about his accomplishments. After dinner, Oliver asked Tyler if he would like to put money into one of his new businesses. In fact, Pratt was very pleased by how far the young man had come in such a short time. He liked the idea of a real business and decided to put $170,000 into it at their first meeting, even though he had no idea what it was about. When Oliver found out that Tyler had a lot of money, he made up a business that didn't exist right then and there to get him to spend. When Carafa got home from this meeting, he told Lucy to think of a business where he could put Tyler's money to work. Oliver was thinking about different ideas when a horrible one came to mind. Carafa was from Eastern Europe, so he knew how to bring girls from that area to Canada and find clients here. That is, he wanted to use Taylor's money to fund another shady and disgusting business. He didn't think Pratt would have liked his idea. Olive told his wife what was on his mind. Luckily, Lucy was smart enough to tell her husband that this was the worst idea he had ever had and stop him from going ahead with it. Finally, Carafa chose to open a company that sold masks, goggles, and gloves for personal protection. These items were very popular during the pandemic. Everything that hospital workers and regular people used during the lockdown. Oliver planned to make a lot of money by getting these popular items at a low price and then selling them for a lot more than they were worth. Carafa took his idea to Tyler and told him all the good things that would happen with the new business. It made Tyler very happy, and she thought Oliver had found gold. Pratt already thought of Carafa as his new business partner and best friend. In fact, things were not so bright. Lucy and Jordan also became friends and spent a lot of time together. The families started getting together often and going to each other's houses. Tyler was so crazy about his new partner that for his birthday, he gave him pricey jewelry. The couple's went to dinner and even planned a trip to Italy together. Tucker was told by Carafa that business was good and that they were selling a lot of personal safety equipment. He was making a lot of money, but he needed more to ship more goods because he was now an honest partner. Pratt didn't think twice about giving Oliver another $470,000. Everything was done over the phone. The two partners did not have any written agreements. The money was given without formality, most of the time over dinner. Tyler didn't worry because he knew the new business was legal. He had a lot of faith in his new partner. However, nobody knew where the money went. Oliver was doing something that not even Lucy knew about. It was all she could think about. All the money was going to buying safety gear that was then sent to Europe. After a few months, Taylor began to ask things. That person asked where his share was and when he would get his money back. Oliver told his partner that the money was in Europe and would be hard to get back. It will take some time. He showed me bank records from accounts in Europe. There were 12 million in one of them. To get Tyler to agree, Carafa told him that 3 million of that money was promised for Pratt. This gave the owner some peace of mind. It would have been fine if Oliver's partner hadn't shown him fake accounts. His bank accounts did not have $12 million in them. It's still not clear where the $640,000 that Taylor gave went. Another thing that is unknown is whether the business of personal safety equipment ever existed. At least the news didn't talk about it. Oliver lost all that money at some point. That much is certain. Or maybe it was just a scam from the start. Tyler brought up the subject of profits again, no matter what happened to the money. He asked for the 3 million that Carafa had promised him. Olive didn't have that much cash, though. He was at a loss for what to do and turned to Lucy for help. To his wife, he told her that he had lost the money Pratt had given him for the business and didn't know what to do. Lucy suggested that they buy time and made a $1.5 million check out to Taylor. It was planned that this money would be taken out of Lucy's mother's bank account. The woman told her husband that Winnie would not even notice the money was stolen. Lucy thought that the fake check would make Tyler feel better and give them time to decide what to do next. As it turned out, the check was never cashed. The next step was another con. Lucy's mom, Winnie, ran an insurance business, and Lucy had worked there long enough to know how it all worked. Lucy told Pratt that her mother's business could help her get an insurance policy so that she could send money from Europe to Canada without having to pay taxes on it. Tyler and Jordan agreed to buy an insurance policy for $1.5 million, but they didn't know they were being lied to again. In fact, Lucy lied to get insurance money and kept the money her friends gave her. Lucy made things worse instead of getting out of the mess Oliver had made. It's not clear what these people wanted or what they were thinking. It was February 2021. After giving money away and not getting anything back, Taylor had had enough. He bought Lucy the insurance policy to try to get the money from Europe sent to him faster, but he still hadn't seen a dime. He saw that Oliver and Lucy were taking their time for some reason. He told his partner that things would get really bad if he didn't get the money by March 1st. Oliver became scared because he knew Tyler was doing something wrong and thought he might still be connected to dangerous people. Carafa asked Lucy for help once more. They really thought about how to get out of there for a long time. They didn't have enough cash to pay Tyler. That's when Lucy and Oliver decided they had to end it for good. After that, things got even worse. Just one day before the due date on February 28, 2021, Carafa asked his partner and fiancé to come to a business meeting. It was said that they had a new business idea to properly grow marijuana. Oliver had even found a big building in an industrial park that would be perfect for putting his great idea into action. He drew up a business plan and told Taylor they could make a lot more money. Carafa said he had already made plans with a real estate agent, so he asked his partner to come to the meeting with him so they could talk about it together. Pratt was interested and didn't know it was all a lie. There was no agent or business plan, so he agreed to meet with them. Carafa actually lied to Tyler about the warehouse visit and did it for a much worse reason. In the morning, Oliver paid cash for a car from a friend. A white Audi Q5 was seen, and the car was not publicly linked to Carafa. Then Lucy got a SIM card that was registered to a friend of hers to hide their tracks even more. A few days before the date, Oliver and Lucy sent each other several texts in which they talked about Tyler and his fiancée Jordan. They also talked about the specifics of the evil plan they were going to carry out on the last day of winter in their letters. They tried to encrypt their messages too. So, on February 28th, Oliver sent Tyler a message with the borrowed SIM card to let him know that he and Lucy were only 10 minutes away from the building. While this was going on, Carafa and Lee drove the white Audi to the empty hangar, turned the building around, and hid the car in a small dead end. Lucy, who was driving, wore a light-colored wig to hide her identity in case the car was caught on tape by accident. Soon after, Tyler and his fiancée, Jordan Romano, drove up to the warehouse in their Range Rover and parked behind the building where they were meant to meet the real estate agent. And that's when the scary things began to happen. When Taylor got out of his car, he was confused because his partner had come in a strange car and his wife Lucy was wearing a blonde wig for some reason. Carafa told Pratt about the real estate agent they were going to meet. While the guys talked near their cars, Lucy and Jordan got into the Range Rover and tried to talk to her to take her mind off of things. Tyler's fiancée was also a little confused. She thought they would quickly look at the rental place and then eat together at a restaurant. Jordan had the right clothes on for the event. She wore a light brown jumper and well-known brand heels. But Lucy didn't look like herself. She usually dressed very stylishly and glammily, and she wore expensive clothes all the time to show off her wealth. Now she was wearing old leggings and a strange wig. Everything about her looked fishy, and Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Romano just recently found out that Taylor and she are going to have a baby. She was 13 weeks along now. Their friends knew this, so what happened next was even scarier. Lucy stopped talking in the middle of a sentence, opened the Range Rover's door, and jumped out onto the street. At that very moment, Jordan looked up at the guys and saw Oliver pointing a gun right at Tyler's face. Joking around with Lucy kept Jordan's attention, but her husband had already taken out a gun and was holding Pratt at gunpoint. Olive aimed the gun at the pregnant lady and pulled the trigger several times before she could do anything. The car was hit by the first 2 shots that didn't make it. Jordan put her car in drive right away and tried to get away from the scene. Oliver then shot a 3rd time. It's too bad that this shot hit its mark. It hit her on the left side of the chest. Everything took only seconds to happen. When Oliver did what he did, Tyler, who was only a few meters away, didn't even have time to respond. When the man found out that his friend and partner had just killed his pregnant fiancée, he charged at him. But Oliver was able to turn around and start pulling the trigger without looking. 5 or 6 times he shot at Tyler. Several bullets hit him in the arms, and one just missed his head. But the last shot, which was aimed straight at his chest, killed him, and he fell to the ground dead. Oliver and Lucy were friends to Jordan and Tyler while they were pregnant. They put all their faith in them, but it was all a lie. Carafa and Lee took Romano's body out of the Range Rover and left it on the side of the road after this stupid attack. Then they got in their own car and drove off. They planned to make some cash by selling the SUV. So they took the car to a friend's shop to be taken apart and sold for parts, which hid their tracks. The killers then went back to the industrial park, walked past Jordan and Tyler's bodies that were still, and got into the Audi. To avoid being caught, they also took that car to the workshop and had it taken apart for parts. Oliver and Lucy took a cab back to their house. The couple was having a great time. The excitement was going strong. They did the worst possible crime, and there was no way they could be caught. One of the victims was still living, which was the only thing they didn't know. One evening at 7:30 p.m., a truck drove by the building in the industrial park. The driver saw something strange on the ground. He pulled over and went over to see what was making him so interested. A woman lay still in the grass next to the road. She had blood all over her. It's crazy that Jordan was still alive after being shot in the heart. At first, the pain knocked her out, but when she woke up, she kept fighting for life. When the woman was very weak, she told the driver in a whisper that she had been shot and asked him to call an ambulance. The emergency services got to the scene right away. Jordan Romano was taken to the hospital and told she needed surgery. Naturally, when there was a report of a shooting, police were also sent to the scene. Tyler's body was found close behind the warehouse. Sadly, he died right away after being shot in the chest, and the police were still trying to find the shooters, but couldn't because they didn't know who could have done it. After hearing the news, Oliver and Lucy stayed home and watched TV. The wife and husband were proud of how well they went through it. When they sold the 2 cars, they paid off all of their bills at once and made some money. But their happiness was short-lived when the reporter covering the story said that one of the victims had lived but was now in a coma. At that exact moment, Oliver and Lucy's happiness shifted to dread. Reports stated that the victim's condition had stabilized, and doctors hoped he or she would soon regain consciousness and be able to recount what had occurred. This meant their elaborate plan had failed. Oliver and Lucy immediately decided to flee to Canada. The very next day after the incident, they boarded a flight to Eastern Europe. The couple spent several days in a Prague hotel before traveling to Slovakia to visit Oliver's parents. Meanwhile, law enforcement began their investigation. Authorities worked tirelessly to track down the perpetrators of the crime. Their first step was analyzing cell tower data. The number in question was traced through a SIM card Lucy had borrowed from a friend. Records showed that this number had been active at the crime scene when shots were fired, making it easy to identify the original owner. The young woman, unaware of the situation, had lent out her spare SIM card. She explained truthfully to investigators that she had given the card to Lucy Lee. This revelation led police to uncover Lucy Lee and her husband, Oliver Carafa, as the prime suspects. Investigators then turned to surveillance footage, which showed the couple hastily leaving their apartment and heading to the airport, further deepening suspicion. Soon, pieces of evidence began to pile up one after another. Cameras at the crime scene recorded the light-colored wig, fragments of Lucy's clothing stained with blood, insurance documents, and the keys to the white Audi. The accumulation of proof against the pair grew steadily. Jordan Romano regained consciousness 3 days after being in a coma. Initially, she was disoriented and had no memory of what had taken place. Police officers had the difficult duty of informing her of the tragedy. She had lost both her fiancé and her unborn child. Once the initial shock faded, Romano did everything in her power to recall the events of that horrific day. At the same time, international arrest warrants were issued for Oliver, 28, and Lucy, 25, who had already fled abroad. Authorities reported that the couple first traveled to Slovakia to see Carafa's parents, then moved on to the Czech Republic, before vanishing in Budapest, Hungary. Lucy's mother, a prominent Canadian businesswoman, addressed the media, expressing that she was shocked, disturbed, and bewildered by her daughter's involvement in such a heinous crime. The woman urged Lucy publicly to assist the police, but Oliver Carafa's parents reacted very differently when they learned their son and daughter-in-law were accused of a crime. The boy's father allegedly paid $250,000 to people who would hide Oliver and Lucy and provide them with new identities. The pair of fugitives made it to Hungary, where they remained in hiding for 2 months until authorities discovered them. Carafa and Lee were arrested and placed in a holding cell. They then faced a lengthy process of extradition to Canada. Oliver refused to return and demanded to be sent to his native Slovakia. Lucy, however, spent a few days in a Hungarian prison and complained that it was not even comparable to a 5-star hotel. She disliked the hard bed, the issued clothing, the bland meals, and the dreary environment of her confinement, so she agreed to return to Canada immediately. When officials arranged Lucy's transport to Canada, she caused an outburst over being seated in economy class. Since her mother could easily afford better travel for her daughter, Lucy begged to be placed in first class. It was one of the most arrogant and conceited displays imaginable. Upon arrival, Lucy refused to answer any questions at the police station, claiming her mother-in-law had instructed her to remain silent. Lee appeared to believe her mother's wealth could protect her from prison. She confidently declared herself innocent, insisting Oliver had always handled their finances during their marriage and that she never knew how he managed his business affairs. Oliver and Lucy were granted bail at $2.7 million. Lucy's mother immediately paid the entire sum, and she was released until trial. Soon afterward, however, Lucy violated her bail conditions. She was therefore rearrested and returned to prison. Oliver, who was eventually extradited to Canada, was denied bail altogether. He remained incarcerated for 2 years while awaiting trial. Proceedings began in April 2024. The trial lasted just over a month. On the stand, Lucy spun a bizarre, elaborate tale portraying herself as a victim of her husband's mistreatment. She fabricated numerous lies in an effort to escape responsibility. Lucy also attempted to create a false alibi by claiming she had spent the entire day with her family, yet no relatives could verify her story. Oliver Carafa, her husband and accomplice, refused to appear in court or provide testimony. The judge ultimately ruled that Oliver and Lucy were guilty on all charges. Both received life sentences, with eligibility for parole after 25 years. Moving on to the next case. Ornella Dattore. In today's video, we are going to a small town in Argentina, where life once moved slowly, but suddenly everything changed. This is the story of Ornella Dattore, a 16-year-old girl whose strange death stunned the entire country. Picture this, a peaceful area in Tucumán, Argentina, around 100 kilometers south of the city's crowded center. It is April 2017, and the fields are covered with long rows of soybean crops. The air feels warm. Nearby lies a town close to Alberti, where everyone knows each other. Children play in the streets, and people chat with one another over coffee. Yet, while playing in a field on April 11, 2017, 2 children discovered something that would forever haunt this place. They stumbled upon a dead body. Ornella Dattore, only 16 years old, was found lifeless in a soybean field, hidden among a cluster of trees. Her clothing was scattered around, and her body showed signs of having been severely harmed. The discovery shocked Alberti deeply. This wasn't simply a tragedy. It was a real-life criminal mystery that enraged people across the country and raised countless questions. Who would hurt a young girl in such a way, and for what reason? It was not just the loss of a youthful active life that made this case terrifying. It was also the details that surfaced in the following days. It was heartbreaking to learn during her autopsy that Ornella was 6 weeks pregnant. This wasn't only a crime against her. It was a tragedy that touched many lives. The police began reconstructing how she had died by combing the field for evidence, speaking with neighbors, and asking the question that comes up in every true crime story. Who was Ornella with that day? Did she have any dangerous people around her? Was there someone nearby who intended to harm her? One thing was certain. This was not a random incident. The police were determined to uncover the entire truth. Ornella had last been seen alive on April 10, 2017, so someone either knew her or encountered her. But to understand this heartbreaking puzzle, we need to know more about Ornella than just a name in the headlines. She was someone with dreams, difficulties, and a life that was far from easy. She had been born in Salta, Argentina, and spent much of her childhood there with her mother, sisters, and maternal grandparents. Family members said she was a girl always in motion, never able to stay still for long. She was like a tornado, her sister Augustina Prey explained. In a conversation, she described her as the sort of person who might suggest baking a dessert one moment and then dash off on her bike to the plaza the next. Everywhere she went, she made friends, and her warm nature drew people to her. Ornella's life was not always simple, though. 2 years before her death, she made the significant decision to leave Salta and relocate to Tucumán to live with her father. It wasn't only about wanting a change of scenery, but also connected to her complicated family background. Ornella's childhood had been difficult due to family conflicts that placed her under court supervision. Her aunt, Maria Dattore, mentioned that Ornella had even requested a restraining order against her mother, showing how deep the issues between them truly were. People rarely spoke about these family struggles, but they influenced Ornella's life and drove her to begin again with her father in Alberti. The situation with her father, however, made matters even more complex. He had only recently been released from prison, though little was known about his time behind bars. What is certain is that he returned to Ornella's life at the same time she moved to Tucumán. Living with him gave Ornella a stronger sense of independence, but she also had to adapt to a new environment. Neighbors in Alberti noticed that Ornella often did not spend nights at home. She would stay with friends or simply wander around town, something people found unusual, though it matched her free-spirited character. Despite her troubles, Ornella looked ahead to a fresh start. She was 6 weeks pregnant when she passed away, though her family in Salta had not known that fact. It highlighted how much of her life in Tucumán was lived independently. Yet, Ornella's freedom carried its own risks. Investigators grew interested in her because she frequently spent the night away from home. Who was she with at those times? Some people claimed she had a boyfriend. Did she truly have one? Or was she merely staying with friends? Police began examining her circle of friends and relatives to find anyone who might have known more about her final days. They interviewed her neighbors, friends, and father to piece together her habits and social ties. Investigators realized Ornella's life extended far beyond what had happened in that soybean field. It also involved the people she knew, the choices she made, and any secrets she might have kept. She lived on her own terms, but what was the cost? Her family relationships were strained, and she often stayed away from home overnight. To understand, we must return to the moment that changed everything, when Ornella's body was discovered in a quiet soybean field, and the horrific details that surfaced at the crime scene and during the autopsy. Naranjo Esquina is a rural area located about 2 kilometers east of Juan Bautista, Alberti, and around 100 kilometers south of Tucumán City. It was Tuesday, April 11, 2017. The location is remote, set on a flat, open plain with soybean fields and scattered trees. It lies far from any cities. A dirt path runs through the crops, leading to a small bridge that crosses Route 38. Nearby, there is a modest neighborhood, but no houses close enough to notice what might occur there. Children sometimes come to play, chasing one another between the rows of plants, unaware of the darker sides of life. That is precisely what unfolded that day. Around noon, 2 young children were playing in the fields, something quite common for kids in Alberti. Near a cluster of trees off the main road, they came across something unusual. A body lay there. At first, it might have resembled a bundle of clothes or discarded items, but as they approached, the reality struck them hard. Ornella appeared to be lying face up in the soil, with parts of her body concealed by the soybean plants. Their game came to an abrupt end, and the children ran off to get help. Someone nearby understood what was happening and alerted the police. Soon after, officers from the Alberti precinct sped toward Naranjo Esquina, their sirens piercing the still countryside. Upon arrival, police encountered a scene both sorrowful and perplexing. Ornella was nearly unclothed, with her garments pulled down around her waist, leaving her lower body exposed. Her face and body bore cuts, bruises, and other signs suggesting a struggle had taken place. Investigators' attention quickly fell on 2 bricks placed across her neck, a disturbing sight. These stones were not random debris. They seemed deliberately positioned, possibly used as weapons or to weigh her down. The field showed no obvious evidence of a prolonged fight, no trampled crops, no scattered possessions, just Ornella lying alone amid the soybean stalks. Once the police cordoned off the area, the quiet farmland transformed into a busy crime scene. Forensic teams scoured the soil for evidence, collecting samples and photographing the bricks to determine who might have been there with Ornella. The remoteness of the site served both as a challenge and a clue. With no nearby residences, there were no witnesses or surveillance cameras to rely on. Whoever brought Ornella there clearly knew the area well, selecting a spot where they would remain unseen, as little activity occurred in the field. This was no random act. It felt deliberate and deeply personal. Ornella's body was transported to the Morgue Judicial Inconscient, where on April 12, 2017, doctors carried out a complete autopsy. The findings revealed a grim picture of her final moments. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, most likely from manual strangulation. Pressure marks were visible on her neck. She had facial injuries that left swelling and bruising, which may have come from blows with hands or possibly from the bricks discovered at the scene. Wounds were also present in her private area, raising suspicions of sexual assault. The report confirmed multiple bruises across her body, suggesting she tried to resist, her reflexes responding during the violent attack. One of the most devastating revelations was Ornella's pregnancy. The autopsy confirmed she was 6 weeks pregnant, intensifying the tragedy of her loss. Police focused sharply on this discovery as it opened new questions. Was she already pregnant when the assault happened? Who was the father of the unborn child? Was he someone close enough to have a motive? The forensic team collected DNA samples from the fetus, hoping the results might provide leads, though analysis would take time. Back at the crime scene, the bricks drew particular attention. They were coarse, weighty, and appeared to carry traces resembling blood, which later testing confirmed belonged to Ornella. Their placement across her neck suggested an attempt to ensure she could not survive, a chilling act of finality. Investigators also recovered soil and plant residue on Ornella's clothing, consistent with the field environment. However, no fingerprints, hair, or DNA were detected that could immediately implicate another person. At first glance, officers bagged the bricks and sent them for further testing, hoping trace evidence might reveal who had touched them. They also discovered that Ornella's phone was missing, a critical piece of potential evidence that might hold calls, texts, or location data leading up to her death. At the scene, fragments of a violent story emerged. The shattered glass, the injuries, and the empty field all pointed toward a deliberate assailant intent on ending Ornella's life. Yet investigators were left perplexed, as there were no eyewitnesses and very little physical evidence. Out there in the field, Ornella had not simply vanished. Someone had led her to that place, and it was most likely a person she knew. The victim was strangled and bore injuries, leading the autopsy to conclude it was a personal assault, not a robbery gone wrong or a random violent act. Rumors circulated in Alberti about Ornella's connections with friends, possibly a boyfriend, and even speculation about a police officer who might have been tied to her pregnancy. Detectives knew they had to proceed with caution, since every lead could either solve the case or collapse into nothing. With forensic experts from Concepcion assisting, the Alberti police were under immense pressure. The case was splashed across national headlines, shouting about a pregnant teenager brutally murdered. Their initial step was to reconstruct Ornella's final day, April 10, 2017. The police began by charting her movements and questioning anyone who might have spotted her. They went door to door in the vicinity of Naranjo Esquina, asking locals if they had noticed anything unusual. Most shook their heads. The field was too remote and isolated from houses, but one shopkeeper near Alberti's main square offered crucial testimony. She told investigators she had seen Ornella walking with a young man around 10 a.m. on April 10th, only hours before she disappeared. The man was a local known as Pomelo, whom she recognized with some uncertainty. This was the first time his name surfaced, and it pushed the investigation forward. Pomelo was identified as Jose Luis Gomez, a 25-year-old resident of Alberti who was acquainted with Ornella. Police already knew Gomez. He had a minor criminal history and a reputation for being rough, and he was now more than just a name from a shopkeeper's statement. Footage from a nearby store's security camera captured Ornella walking with a man resembling Gomez. The recording was grainy, but the timestamp marked April 10th at 10:17 a.m. Officers moved quickly. On April 13th, they interrogated Gomez, hoping he could clarify his connection to Ornella and explain why he was with her that morning. The exchange was tense. He admitted knowing Ornella, claiming they were friends who occasionally spent time together. He acknowledged seeing her on April 10th, but insisted they parted ways around noon near the plaza, where she supposedly said she was going to meet someone else. His account was inconsistent, and his nervous, evasive behavior raised suspicions. Later that day, Gomez stated he had been at a friend's house, but that friend could not fully corroborate his alibi. Police checked his house for anything that could connect him to the crime scene, like clothes that had dirt on them from the field, blood, or even Ornella's phone, which had gone missing. Even though they didn't find anything solid, Gomez was their main suspect because he didn't have a good excuse and was with Ornella that morning. However, the cops did not yet blame Gomez for everything. This kind of true crime story usually has more than one layer, and the investigators knew they shouldn't rule out other options. It was hard to figure out what was going on in Ornella's life because her relationships was so complicated. Talks about a police officer in Alberti led to one tip. There were rumors going around that Ornella might have been seeing an officer, maybe even the father of her unborn child. The police looked into this in secret by talking to cops at the Alberti precinct and seeing what their plans were for April 10th. Even though there was no solid proof, the rumor made things more interesting by implying that someone in power might be involved. A man Ornella had been seeing, who was only known as Facundo, was another possible suspect. At first, Ornella's friends told the cops that she had talked about a boyfriend, someone she was excited about but didn't tell anyone else about. On April 14th, Facundo was asked some questions. He said he dated Ornella for a short time, but that they broke up weeks before she died. People who worked with him on April 10th confirmed that he was at work in a nearby town, which backed up his story. They kept an eye on him, though, because they thought jealousy or a secret fight might have played a part. Investigators talked to people close to Ornella to get a better idea of what was going on. They talked to her father, who had just gotten out of jail and was living with her. In Tucumán, he was heartbroken and said Ornella was what kept him going. When he was asked why she stayed out so late, she said she often spent time with friends and didn't come home until the next morning. He couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt her, but he did say that she had been quieter before April 10th, as if she had something on her mind. The picture that Ornella's friends painted was similar. A close friend, Abigail Lever, told police that Ornella was always smiling and moving, but she had seen a change. She didn't talk about the guy, because she was happy about the baby. Abigail said that Sophia, another friend, said she saw Ornella fight with a man near the park a week ago, but couldn't name him. Sophia remembered. It wasn't loud, but she looked upset. The way Ornella was feeling, and the fact that she kept her pregnancy a secret, were both small signs that she might have been dealing with a personal problem that led her to that field. When the cops got a tip from a local teen on April 15th, the investigation took a big turn. The teen heard a talk about Ornella while at a party near the plaza on April 10th. The kid said that some guys were talking about Pomelo and how he was mad at Ornella over something personal. The teen didn't know much about it, but one of the guys said he saw Gomez that afternoon near Route 38. This was very important because it put Gomez closer to the crime scene at a time when he said he was somewhere else. The cops went even further with Gomez and interviewed him again. They showed him the security video and the teens this time. Even though Gomez stuck to his story, he made a mistake when he said he had been near Route 38 to meet a friend. He later admitted he was wrong. The police detained him on April 16th and charged him with suspicion of murder because of the mismatch. People in Alberti were furious when Gomez was arrested. Some defended him, saying he was unhappy but not a killer, while others thought he could do anything. It wasn't easy to handle the case. A big problem was that Ornella's phone was lost. Investigators thought it might hold texts or calls that could show who she was with, but Gomez's house and the field were searched and nothing was found. They asked her carrier for her phone records to try to figure out what she was talking about last, but the process was slow and took days to finish. At the same time, rumors kept going around. Some people in Alberti talked about a possible drug link since Ornella has had problems with addiction in the past. The police looked into this and talked to known drug dealers in the area, but they couldn't find any proof that her death was connected to drugs. The community's mixed reactions were also hard. Some neighbors worked together, but others were unsure and didn't want to get involved. People around here don't like talking to the police. The owner of a nearby pub told the police this unwillingness slowed down the flow of information, so the police had to depend on forensic evidence a lot. The bricks from the crime scene were still being looked at, and early tests showed that one of them had Ornella's blood on it. But without fingerprints or more DNA, the bricks couldn't prove anyone guilty, not even Gomez. As the police's probe grew, they found more evidence of strange behavior. A farmer who worked in the fields near Naranjo Esquina told police that on April 10th, around 4 p.m., he saw a motorcycle stopped next to a dirt road. He didn't know anything about the rider, but he did notice that the bike was black, which wasn't Gomez's known car. This made it more likely that there was another person at the scene, someone who might not have been seen. The main suspect was still Gomez. His link to Ornella and proximity to the crime scene were too important to ignore, but the case was not solid because there was no physical proof connecting him to the field other than the security footage. The police officer rumor stuck around thanks to tips from strangers, but no officer was officially named as a suspect. Facundo, the ex-boyfriend, didn't seem as likely. His story did hold up. The motorbike was another loose thread that pointed to another character in this real crime drama. The cops were almost there, but they were missing Ornella's phone records. Once they got there, they saw a lot of calls and texts from April 10th, including one to a number registered to someone in Alberti that didn't belong to Gomez. With this new lead, the investigation changed its focus, and it became more likely that someone else, someone who hadn't been seen before, was involved in Ornella's last hours. The big break came on April 18, 2017, when a young man with a story that turned the case on its head went to the Alberti police station. These people, whose names were not released, admitted that they bought a cell phone from a 24-year-old local with a bad character named Gustavo Perito Carrero. He said that Ornella Dottori owned the phone. That's the piece that detectives had been looking for. There was a new suspect because Ornella's phone, which wasn't found at the crime scene or with Gomez, was now linked to them. The police moved quickly and issued a warrant for Carrero's arrest. He was already on the run, knowing that the police were closing in on him. It took a while to catch Carrero. He was known as Perito, which means little dog in Spanish, and was a streetwise character in Alberti who was good at getting away. But the cops wouldn't give up. On April 20th, they found him hiding in the country, outside of Alberti, after getting a tip from a neighbor. When police officers circled Carrero, he didn't fight back, but he was cold and almost defiant. He was taken to the station in handcuffs and asked questions that would reveal all of his carefully planned lies. When Ornella's phone was found, it wasn't just a clue. It was a surprise that put the investigation on Carrero instead of Gomez. And what did the people of Alberti know about Gustavo Perito Carrero? You knew him, but you wouldn't want to cross him. Carrero was born and raised in Tucumán. He had a criminal record that included small thefts and drug-related crimes, but nothing as dangerous as what he was facing now. He was 24 years old and lived on the edges of society. He did odd jobs and hung out with a rough group of people. His neighbors said he was unreliable and that he could be friendly one minute and mean the next. Carrero knew Ornella, but it wasn't clear how they were related. There was no way to know for sure if they were friends, or if they were seeing each other more closely. His history of getting into and out of trouble with the law since he was a teenager gave the cops the wrong idea that he was unbeatable. Carrero was charged with killing someone. The charges came about because there was more and more proof against him. The cell phone was the key. Its serial number led to Ornella, and her family proved that it was hers. The young guy who bought it told police that Carrero gave it to him for a small amount of money on April 12th, one day after Ornella's body was found. The phone's contents had been erased, so forensic research did not show any new data, but the fact that it was sold was bad. Carrero shouldn't have Ornella's phone unless he was with her when she died. More evidence made the knot tighter. At the crime scene, the bricks that were wrapped around Ornella's neck had blood on them. No fingerprints were found, but soil samples from Carrero's shoes that were taken during his arrest matched the makeup of the soybean field. Investigators also found a jacket with light blood stains in Carrero's hiding place. The jacket was later proven to be Ornella's through DNA testing. Together, these real links and the phone made a strong case. But Carrero's own words were what made his hole deeper. Carrero tried to make up a story to avoid being linked to the crime when he was questioned. And he said Ornella gave him her phone to sell. He also said she was still alive and well when he last saw her. He said Ornella asked me to sell the phone for her because she needed cash quickly. I did it. I gave her the money and she left, he said. Ornella's family and friends said she'd never give up her phone, which was her only way to stay in touch with people, and the timing didn't make sense. The police pushed him and showed him the mistakes. Why did he wipe the phone clean if Ornella gave it to him? Why sell it the same day that her body was found? If he hadn't done anything wrong, why was he hiding? Carrero's answers became less consistent, and he finally shut down, unwilling to talk without a lawyer. His attempt to make himself look like a good guy fell apart when detectives looked more closely. They saw his story for what it was, a desperate attempt to avoid justice. It was harder to figure out why Ornella died, but the police came up with an idea based on the evidence and Carrero's background. A big reason was Ornella's pregnancy. She was happy about the future when she was 6 weeks pregnant, but the fact that she wasn't telling anyone about the father suggested problems. Investigators thought Carrero might have been seeing her romantically, or at least knew she was pregnant. The prosecution afterwards said that Carrero, out of jealousy or fear of being responsible, lied to get Ornella to the isolated field where they got into a fight that turned violent. The fact that she was strangled, hit with a hard object, and had bricks put around her neck suggested that the crime was not planned ahead of time. The cops thought Carrero did what he did in a fit of anger, which could have been caused by a fight over the pregnancy or Ornella's rejection. What about the first suspect, José Luis Gimez? Ince Carrero was in jail. Gimez was freed. and his only part was as a witness who had been with Ornella earlier that day, April 10th. The police officer rumors died down because there wasn't enough proof, and the motorbike sighting near the field was still not explained, which could have been a chance. It had been more than 15 months since Ornella's body was found in that soybean field when the trial began in December 2018. It was very painful for her family to wait because they had been grieving and demanding justice for months. Carrero was charged with murder, enhanced by femicide and sex s******, which was based on the autopsy results of strangulation, blunt force injuries, and possibly assault. The prosecution's case was strong and clear. Gustavo Carrero killed Ornella because he wanted to hurt her personally because she was pregnant. As an example, they said that Carrero tricked Ornella into going to the lonely pitch on April 10, 2017, by saying something else. When things got physical, he choked her and hit her with bricks to make sure she died. Then he ran away and sold her phone to hide his tracks. Their case was built around the facts. The bricks found across Ornella's neck, which had blood on them, were shown by the prosecutors. Even though no fingerprints were found, the unique makeup of the dust from Carrero's shoes led investigators to believe that he was at the scene of the crime. DNA tests proved that the bloody jacket that was found in his hiding place belonged to Ornella. This was a key piece of evidence that linked him directly to the crime. The worst piece of proof was the cell phone. It was bought by Carrero on April 12th, and its serial number matched Ornella's. The prosecution disproved his claim that Ornella asked him to sell it by pointing out that her family said she could not live without her phone and that he sold it a day after her body was found, which didn't make sense. DNA proof was very important, but was not easy to use. Samples from Ornella's body were taken for the autopsy. These samples included fluids that showed signs of sexual. The prosecutor said that DNA from Carrero matched DNA found on Ornella. Still, DNA from the fetus was tested. It didn't directly link Carrero to the crime, but it did lead to a lot of questions about who the baby's father was, which became the main focus of the trial. Neighbors agreed that she was thrilled about the baby, but the prosecution highlighted that she was hiding the father's identity. From the start of the investigation, there were rumors that the father was a police officer, and these persisted throughout the trial. The presiding judge initiated a review against the Alberti police, requesting an inquiry into whether an officer had any involvement with Ornella or her pregnancy. This decision stunned the courtroom and raised suspicions about whether the police had overlooked a crucial lead or even shielded one of their own. However, no officer was ever formally charged. The judge's review sent a warning that no one was untouchable. Carrero's lawyer directed his defense team in an effort to dismantle the prosecution's case. They argued that the evidence was insufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt because it lacked clarity. The defense maintained that Carrero was made a scapegoat due to his criminal background and negative reputation in Alberti. They challenged the DNA evidence, claiming the samples connected to the assault were inconclusive and suggesting the blood on Carrero's jacket might have come from prior contact with Ornella rather than the crime itself. The defense adhered to Carrero's explanation over the phone, that Ornella had given him the jacket to sell, and he had no reason to suspect she was in danger. They presented a witness, a friend of Carrero, who testified to having seen Ornella alive on April 10th after her encounter with Carrero. Yet the testimony was weak and conflicted with the timeline revealed by security footage. The defense also disputed the soil evidence, asserting that the field's composition was typical for Alberti and that many locals could carry similar traces on their shoes. They requested a lesser charge, such as simple homicide, on the grounds that there was insufficient proof of intent or femicide. The defense attempted to redirect suspicion by pointing toward other potential suspects, including the rumored police officer. They contended that the investigation had been hurried and unfairly targeted Carrero to appease public opinion, overlooking clues that might have led to a more plausible suspect. This argument failed to gain traction because the judge was already investigating the police, and it was difficult to dismiss the evidence against Carrero as fabricated. The defense worked to plant doubt, but the prosecution's firm case left them little ground. The verdict was delivered on December 14, 2018. Gustavo Carrero was convicted of murder with femicide and sexual assault as aggravating elements. He received a life sentence without the chance of release. Although the DNA evidence was not entirely definitive, the judges upheld the sexual element because the autopsy revealed genital injuries and the assault occurred in a specific manner. The prosecution secured the verdict by pushing hard to frame Ornella's case as a symbol in the struggle against femicide in Argentina. For Ornella's family, the ruling was both a relief and a burden. The trial was excruciating as they were forced to relive graphic evidence and testimony about Ornella's death repeatedly. Her family remained distressed that the identity of the baby's father was never determined, believing that the truth was still unresolved. This unanswered thread made the case even more complex. It was not solely about one man's crime. The inquiry into allegations that a police officer fathered Ornella Daughtery's unborn child began during Gustavo Carrero's trial and remains largely unresolved based on the information available. In December 2018, during the proceedings, the presiding judge ordered an internal investigation into the Alberti police to establish whether an officer had a relationship with Ornella and whether that connection played a role in her death. This move stemmed from persistent community rumors and testimony from a neighbor who claimed to have seen Ornella with a police officer. Such complications are common in investigations in small towns like Alberti, where personal ties often blur accountability. According to credible sources, the father of Ornella Daughtery's unborn child has never been officially identified, and as of April 2025, no confirmation exists. The absence of a definitive answer regarding paternity leaves doubts about the thoroughness of the investigation. That brings to a close the story of Ornella Daughtery. Moving on to the next case. Phoenix Spencer Horn. In today's video, we explore the shocking and deeply unsettling case of a murderous postman who carried out an unthinkable act, then spent days living with the headless body of his lover before the horrifying truth was revealed. This is Phoenix Spencer Horn. She was 21 years old, intelligent, kind, and loved as she should have been. Opposite her, this is Ewan Methvin. He was 27 years old, intense, reserved, and carried an evil within him that no one expected. This young couple shared a small flat that appeared ordinary to anyone passing through a quiet town in Scotland, not far from Glasgow. From what I saw on social media, they seemed happy. In many of their videos, they were talking, eating, and planning their life together. Behind closed doors, however, something far worse was happening. What began as a loving relationship slowly turned into one that was dangerous, controlling, and suffocating. Phoenix Spencer Horn always stood by her boyfriend with love and forgiveness. She held on to hope that he might change eventually, but the reality was that she did not recognize how damaged and dangerous he truly was. To be fair, you cannot really blame her. Some may have thought Ewan was slightly odd and awkward, but nobody believed he could kill someone, much less his own partner. Then on a cold November night in 2024, he did the unimaginable. What Ewan did to her body and to himself in the hours after killing her is what makes this case distinct. And let's just say, it will horrify you entirely. East Kilbride was Scotland's first official new town, built in 1947 to ease overcrowding in Glasgow after the war. It was designed as a carefully planned community with green neighborhoods, roundabouts, and well-organized shopping centers. It stood as a model of modern life intended to make the future brighter and better. According to many, that vision remains alive, and East Kilbride, now home to over 75,000 residents, is still considered a family-friendly town. Yet like many communities founded on ideals, it carries dark sides. As a note, did you know East Kilbride became nationally known in 2005 when police discovered Vicky Hamilton's body buried in a back garden? She had been murdered by Peter Tobin, later exposed as one of the UK's most prolific serial killers. The case of Vicky Hamilton left residents of the town feeling unsafe. In the decades that followed, East Kilbride saw a gradual but consistent increase in domestic and drug-related violence, reflecting a trend common in many post-industrial areas of the country. This is also where Phoenix Spencer Horn, aged 21, and her partner, 27-year-old Ewan Methvin, lived. Their home was on a quiet residential street named Glen Lee. Phoenix, born in 2003, was the fourth and youngest child in her family. She grew up in the small town of Straven in South Lanarkshire, Scotland, where her family resided. They were close, loving, and steady, with parents who ensured all of their children succeeded in school. Her parents, Alison and Graham, raised their children with strong values. Phoenix, standing out from an early age, seemed to care deeply for everyone around her. Not only was she outwardly beautiful, but her spirit was equally radiant. She was bright, kind-hearted, and quietly compassionate. She was the sort of person who always stepped in to help anyone facing difficulties. At Straven Academy, she was known for the same qualities that defined her at home. She was kind, humorous, and possessed a rare ability to understand others' feelings. Teachers remembered her as diligent and someone who made others feel noticed. After finishing high school, Phoenix threw herself into work and adult life. She got a job at the nearby Straven Hotel in a cafe, where she served coffee and other drinks with ease. And I must mention coffee. She made it seem effortless. Both her co-workers and managers admired her, as did her customers. Well, let's just say they adored her. Phoenix's life outside of work was sweet and uncomplicated. She placed her family first, loved music, enjoyed long countryside walks, and did many of the same things most young adults do today. She often posted videos on TikTok, filled with moments of joy, eating ice cream with friends, snapping selfies in golden hour light, and goofing around with her brothers. At this stage, she was balancing her jobs, enjoying her independence, and laying plans for her future. This is when she met Ewan Methvin, the man who would later become her boyfriend. At first glance, he appeared quiet and gentle. He was someone who said little in public, but seemed more thoughtful and tender when alone. For those of you in the US and Australia, that might sound like a typical British man. Yet, even by our standards, he was unusually reserved. Ewan Methvin was 27 years old when this story took place. He grew up in Straven, which is close to East Kilbride. He lived with his family there and attended schools in the area. As he got older, he became a postman for Royal Mail. It was a steady and dependable job that he carried out well, according to many reports. People who knew Ewan casually thought he was sociable and well-liked, though somewhat shy. Yet he also had another side that few had seen. Some neighbors recalled that he could be angry at times and that his eyes would seem lifeless when he was unwell. This was even more noticeable for those who had seen his social media pages earlier. Between the ages of 14 and 18, he posted a series of troubling messages online. These messages carried a violent tone, angry and extremely sexist toward women. In one post, he said, "You always have that one person you choke to smash out of." In another, he wrote, "It's kill or be killed." In one of the more disturbing posts, he claimed he wanted to kick her big, horrible teeth out, which in northern slang meant to punch her. There were dozens of similar texts, not just a few. Making it worse, Ewan also claimed he was a local drug dealer and sometimes a porn star. He would even brag that anger made him feel tense and excited. People who saw the posts remembered them, even after they were later deleted and wiped from the internet. Ewan's online image showed a teenager who appeared driven by violence and arrogance. No one could dismiss the warning signs, even if they thought it was only a phase. After a few years, Ewan was quietly employed at Royal Mail. His colleagues said he kept to himself, did his deliveries without complaint, and tried not to draw much attention, which was a sharp change from someone who had once bragged about being a drug dealer and occasional porn star to becoming a postal worker and a constant red flag. At some point in late 2022, he met Phoenix. She was only 20, and he had just turned 25 when they were introduced at a family gathering. At first glance, they seemed very different from one another. Phoenix was cheerful and radiant, while Ewan was simply Ewan. Sometimes, though, differences bring people together. Her friends described her as kind, humorous, and very loyal. She always seemed to know when he needed comfort or some form of support. At first, they looked like a good match. She was studying and working part-time, while he held a secure job, so they complemented each other. Phoenix seemed like a great partner because she added energy and color to his life and encouraged him to explore new things. Because of her, he began to come out of his shell. On the surface, Ewan appeared to be a decent man. As time went on, he built good relationships with her family. He seemed so affectionate and loving that her friends would even comment he doted on her. Based on what Phoenix herself shared, it was clear she deeply loved him. Within months, they were living together in a rented flat in East Kilbride. From the outside, everything seemed fine. They marked birthdays, took photos, and visited family almost weekly. It looked like a typical couple trying to navigate life. But behind closed doors, things were not so simple. Over time, Ewan began to change. It was not sudden but gradual. At first, it was little things like sharp remarks, sulking moods, and pouting when situations didn't favor him. Later, he grew jealous of her friends, her conversations, her job, and even her clothing. Phoenix, being the caring person she was, worked hard to calm him. But in truth, the cracks widened. His anxieties deepened, and Ewan became increasingly unstable. Phoenix never caused a scene. Instead, she quietly confided in her friends, letting them know things were no longer going well. By mid-2024, she had finally decided she was ready to leave and no longer wanted Ewan in her life. But Ewan didn't handle rejection well and believed he had a solid reason for it. He claimed he wasn't truly a bad man, just a victim of cocaine, steroids, and alcohol, and insisted things would improve once he overcame those addictions. However, instead of changing, he used these faults as an excuse. Phoenix, ever patient, kept faith in him. By November 2024, Phoenix and Ewan had lived together for nearly 2 years. Yet Ewan had become increasingly worse, more drugs, more emotional instability, and more controlling behavior. In hindsight, it all made sense. Ewan felt trapped in his tedious job and cycles of dependence. Phoenix should never have endured it, that much was clear. Tragically, her compassion and gentleness were what kept her there and led to her betrayal. It was an ordinary Saturday night, November 16, 2024. Phoenix had finished her shift at the Straven Hotel and went home to be with her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Ewan had been alone all afternoon and even texted her saying he was feeling lonely. Phoenix replied warmly, saying they would be together soon. That evening, they ate dinner in front of the TV. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary, quiet night in. A couple in a long-term relationship, eating and relaxing after a busy week. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix texted her mother to say she and her dad were eating dinner at home. The response was brief and casual, giving no hint that anything was wrong. Sadly, within hours, everything would change. Neighbors heard loud noises and hurried footsteps just after midnight. The sounds seemed to come from above, and the atmosphere didn't match a typical weekend night. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Silence followed, from the flat and from Phoenix's phone. Through the night, she didn't respond to messages or calls. The hours passed quietly, the flat remained dark, and her phone stayed inactive. By the next morning, Phoenix still hadn't replied to her mother, prompting Allison to grow worried. She sent another message. A reply eventually came, but it was short and very unlike Phoenix. It just said, "Sorry, I just woke up." Ewan had also sent Allison messages saying that he and she were both drunk that night and that her daughter was still asleep, which again made her nervous because it wasn't like her at all. They were worried about her, but they thought she might just need some time to get over her hangover. We didn't look into it much more during the rest of the day. But when she didn't show up for work the next day, on Monday, November 18th, her family became very worried. As expected, they called the police to look into it. Police arrived at the flat at 12:10 p.m. just after noon. Even though they were mostly interested in finding Phoenix, Ewan replied. As usual, he seemed calm, collected, and eerily quiet. The police were allowed inside, and when they did, they saw something horrible. The hallway smelled like copper, and police officers saw right away that there was a naked body lying in the room with a tea towel over part of it. They could tell right away that Phoenix had been severely mutilated because her head had been cut off and was standing up next to her body under her left arm. By looking around the land, it was clear that Ewan had tried to cut her up. 2 bloody knives were found next to her body in a third. Also, stained knife was found in the bedroom. The police said the scene was so brutal, personal, and unreservedly aggressive. What's even stranger is that Ewan stayed calm the whole time. It was surprising that he answered all of their questions honestly and without any pushback. Because he couldn't stay in the flat with a full body, he told them straight out that he tried to cut her up when they asked him why he did it. All the detectives were terrified by this chilling flatness. That was said without any fear or regret. The worst thing was that Ewan didn't seem to care. He even told a cop, "Guess this is what my next 25 years will look like." It wasn't a surprise that our mailman was quickly caught and taken straight to jail with express delivery included. The next step was pretty easy. Crime scene officers put up a fence around the scene and started making notes about every part of the flat. They looked at where the knives were, where her body was, and how it was breaking down at every stage. What a sad story. Phoenix had been cut more than 20 times, and many of the times were straight in the face. The report also said that even though she had many stab wounds to the face, it was probably one to the chest that killed her. Ewan wouldn't stop yapping even after he was caught. He told the police that he had passed out while high on drugs and mentioned that steroids, cocaine, and alcohol might have all had something to do with his behavior. He never tried to avoid taking blame. He seemed focused on making himself look like a broken man who was split up by drugs and deep-seated feelings. It turned out that this wasn't the first time he had admitted to killing Phoenix. He had called 999 himself just a short time before the cops showed up at the front door. He had told the operator quietly that he had killed his girlfriend on the phone. A call center worker asked him if he was sure she was dead, and he said, "I know she is dead, mate. She is dead. I even tried to dismember her." What really happened that terrible night? From what he said and the forensic proof that was available, Ewan suddenly attacked Phoenix just after midnight and made no noise. It looks like none of this was happening for a reason. He just wanted to kill her. Someone jumped on top of her and choked her. Then they stabbed her more than 20 times. At 12:13 a.m., a neighbor who was downstairs said they heard a big bang, and then several footsteps coming from above. It was too late by that time. Phoenix was no longer there. What happened next was almost too unbelievable to believe. Now that he was alone in the apartment, Ewan put her body in the bathtub, got 3 knives from the kitchen, and then, the most horrifying thing of all, cut off her head. By morning, they could no longer recognize the place they had once called home. After that, there was only the sound of Ewan pacing the flat to break the silence. Not a single person screamed for help, called 911, or said they were sorry. At this point, it was just a creepy room with a killer who was left to do what he had done. When her family started to worry, Ewan texted her mother as if nothing was wrong while pretending to be her. A few meters away, her dead body lay on the floor, unable to do anything. Ewan's behavior got even worse over the course of that Sunday, which is strange because you'd think it would stop at murder. But really, it got a lot worse because between 8 a.m., between 7 p.m., and midnight he watched adult videos on her phone. That's right, I said it more than 170 times, not just once or twice. He watched hundreds of these videos over the next 10 hours while his girlfriend's body lay on the floor next to him. I mean, I really don't think you could be more disgusting. Crossovers like that, at that level of energy, are really scary. He would even order drugs to his flat later that day, when he was halfway through this binge. He would then keep going with it. Later, he was caught on camera driving Phoenix's red Vauxhall Corsa around town. At least once, he was seen leaving the flat. This meant that he probably went to find a local drug dealer and look for ways to get rid of the proof. In any case, it was clear that he was planning his actions to get over her death, while also trying to get high all at once. At the same time, worry was building quickly in the family. People who worked at Straven Hotel called Phoenix's parents when she didn't show up for work the next day. That's when they finally had enough. Allison called the cops because she was already suspicious of what was going on. This call, and Ewan's own call to the cops to confess, would put an end to this terrible mystery. Up until that point, it was clear that Ewan had done everything he could to avoid being caught, from fake text messages to watching hours of pornography to crude attempts to make her body move more easily. He finally called 999 when he realized he could no longer avoid what was going to happen. When Ewan was arrested, it was the start of a long and very disturbing probe. Even though he admitted to the crime both at the scene and on the phone with the cops, they still had to figure out what had happened. Forensic teams spent hours gathering evidence in that flat, and Phoenix's family was told that her body had been found, which was very sad. Since then, they haven't been the same. 3 days after that, Ewan went to court for the first time and was charged with murder and trying to get around the law. He didn't plead guilty or say sorry, so he was sent back to jail. This case was quickly moved to the High Court in Glasgow because of how violent it was. Over the next few months, prosecutors built their case by using autopsy reports, digital forensics, witness statements, and thorough crime scene analysis reports as proof. It had been 6 months, and on June 17, 2025, he was finally ready to go to court. There were reporters, spectators, and sad family members in the room. At the same time, Ewan stood still in the dock while the lawyers described the charges in great detail. They told the judge that Phoenix had been stabbed many times, choked, and then had her head cut off. It was also said that he watched more than 170 pornographic videos and drank and did drugs while her naked dead body lay just meters away from him. Ewan knew that he couldn't just leave because there was so much against him. To avoid this, he admitted to both charges, but only after the prosecution was able to make their case. They said that he did what he did because he was jealous, aggressive, and had been abusing drugs for a long time. But the most interesting thing about this was how planned he was after the fact. They would say this was not some random accident or sudden madness, but instead a series of cold and terrifying choices. What stands out is that his defense team did not try to dispute the facts either. Rather, Ewan's lawyer argued that his client had suffered a mental and emotional breakdown, which was why he claimed not to remember killing the woman. And here is the part that really strikes me. His own lawyer said that nearly everyone would view him as, quote, the personification of evil. When your own defense lawyer says that about you, well, let's just say you know you are completely doomed. Even so, the court rejected the claims of a blackout. The evidence told a different story, and when the final points were made, the courtroom grew so silent it felt like it might erupt. There was violence, there was destruction, and there were lies. The judge had listened to them all. Once Ewan's guilty plea was accepted, the last step left was sentencing. That moment came on July 14, 2025. The judge described the killing as horrific and condemned Ewan for betraying the trust of someone who had regarded him as family. For his crimes, Ewan was given a life sentence, with a minimum of 23 years before he can even be considered for release. The judge emphasized that he never called for help or contacted the police after the murder. Instead, he indulged in his bad habits inside the flat for nearly 48 hours. This, of course, demonstrated a shocking lack of remorse or urgency. The judge summed it up with one line: "You robbed her of all dignity." Phoenix's family also addressed the court. They played voice recordings and victim impact statements that spoke of the grief, rage, and pain caused by the attack, along with the haunting silence that now seems to linger over their lives. It was only at 21 years old when Phoenix Spencerhorn's life was taken in one of the most brutal ways possible. She was still young and full of hopes and dreams. Many people showed respect to her both online and in person after her death. A memorial bench now stands in her hometown of Straven, where donations can be left for Glasgow Women's Aid in her memory. Those who knew her will never forget how funny she was, how loyal she was, and how warm she was. How could someone so kind and full of life live with someone so dangerous? That is likely the hardest question they are still left trying to answer. What could make these TikTok videos look so different from real life? Another point worth saying is that what we see online is not always the truth. I know I mention this often on this channel. In reality, many people display only their best 1% online, which makes everything look like a perfect day. From a psychological perspective, it becomes a trap that makes others feel like they are not enough. Phoenix and Ewan looked like any other young couple on social media. They posted trips, smiled in pictures, and wrote about the small things that brought them happiness in daily life. To outsiders, their relationship appeared normal. But in truth, those edited glimpses only revealed a small fraction of the story. Ewan was struggling behind the scenes, driven by jealousy, insecurity, and a desperate need for control. Phoenix, being kind, tried to carry that burden herself. That is one of the dangers of living through social media, where all the lies, jealousy, and hatred stay hidden behind just a few pixels. Thank you for watching this chilling and disturbing case. It is terrifying to think that behind what seems like an ordinary smile, there can exist such unimaginable darkness. This story proves how twisted desires can drive someone past the limits of humanity. It is a reminder to always trust your instincts and stay aware of the people around you, no matter how normal they appear. Moving on to the next case. Stephen Freeman. In today's video, we explore one of the most twisted and unsettling cases you will ever hear. The house at 1470 Sunnybrook Drive in the United States once served as a warm place for dinners and youthful dreams. But on a quiet summer evening in 2018, it suddenly became the scene of a dreadful tragedy. Before discussing that horrific night, it is essential to understand who Stephen Freeman was. He had once lived in that house. Stephen was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomasville County. Financial struggles marked his early childhood. Within just a few years, his family relocated to Griffin City in search of better opportunities. It was a loving and nurturing environment for Stephen to grow up in. Inside that very house, Stephen's parents worked tirelessly to provide both him and his older brother with the best foundation for life possible. They ensured the boys received not only material necessities, but also emotional and spiritual support. That type of upbringing quickly showed in Stephen's character. As a child, he was cheerful, and people were naturally drawn to him. He constantly wore a smile and radiated joy. No matter what challenges arose, Stephen always managed to find a reason to remain positive. His bright personality came from a profound love for his family, particularly the close relationship he shared with his mother. Stephen felt immense pride when his mother decided to return to school and pursue higher education. Her determination inspired him greatly. On the day she received her diploma, Stephen wrote her a heartfelt letter, expressing how proud he was and thanking her for everything she had done for him and his brother. Not long afterward, Stephen formed another significant bond. Mary Catherine Higdon, a friend 1 year older than him, came into his life. They first met in high school and quickly became close due to shared interests and a mutual love for the outdoors. Mary Catherine enjoyed camping, often venturing into the woods overnight with Stephen and his close circle of friends. Their connection was not only based on similar hobbies. Her confidence and openness also played a vital part. She was unafraid of rugged terrain or firearms, and her comfort in those situations made her stand out. Those who knew Stephen quickly grew fond of her because they saw the happiness she brought into his life. Before long, she was a constant presence at every group activity. However, their relationship extended beyond weekend adventures. The similarity in Stephen and Mary Catherine's upbringings also strengthened their bond. She was raised in a loving household and was remembered for singing and dancing with her family during childhood. She left a strong impression on everyone around her, especially Stephen. Energetic, creative, and deeply connected to animals and nature, she shaped their shared experiences. As the two entered adulthood, they began to build a life together apart from their families. After finishing high school, Stephen and Mary Catherine moved in together. Stephen worked for a roofing repair company, while Mary Catherine was employed as a preschool assistant teacher nearby. As the years passed, their relationship grew alongside them. By 2018, Stephen was 23 and Mary Catherine was 24. They had been together for 7 years, a long time to experience the ups and downs of being closely tied for so long. Like many couples, they argued at times. Some disagreements escalated into major conflicts, even leading to a brief separation. Yet, it always felt as though nothing could truly break them. They repeatedly found their way back to one another, with each challenge only deepening their commitment. Over time, both families fully accepted their relationship. Mary Catherine often joined Stephen's family for Sunday dinners. That closeness extended into strong family bonds. Stephen's mother cared deeply for Mary Catherine and treated her like a daughter. During holidays, both families would gather together, creating joyful celebrations. Christmas stood out as the most special, always hosted in the warm home on Sunnybrook Drive. Yet, not every gathering remained peaceful. On the night of August 1st, 2018, everything changed inside that once familiar house. At 11 p.m., the quiet street was suddenly disrupted by sirens, with red and blue lights flashing against the windows. Silence fell as an ambulance and police car stopped outside 1470 Sunnybrook Drive. The urgency of their arrival quickly became tragically clear. A distressed woman named Mary Catherine had dialed emergency services multiple times. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain what had happened inside the house where she and Stephen had lived together for years. Through sobs and gasps, Mary Catherine insisted she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She described a chaotic scene, crying as she explained that she was only handing the gun to Stephen when it discharged on its own. She claimed she hadn't known it was loaded. When officers arrived, they found Stephen lying motionless on a cushion in the middle of the living room. Mary Catherine was on her knees beside him, crying uncontrollably and calling his name. She was inconsolable. When police tried to move her so paramedics could reach Stephen, she resisted, pushing them away and screaming that she couldn't lose him. After several attempts to calm her, emergency responders were finally able to assess Stephen. He was still conscious, though in critical condition, with a dangerously weak pulse. Medical staff rushed him to the hospital immediately. Police delayed questioning Mary Catherine until he was safely transported. Even then, communication was strained. Mary Catherine continued sobbing and struggling to speak through her distress. All she could do was repeat her claim that the shooting was accidental and that she had never intended for it to happen. She emphasized that she hadn't even aimed the gun at Stephen, but that it had gone off unexpectedly. The bullet struck his upper chest, causing severe injury near the neck. Paramedics attempted to control the bleeding immediately, but the amount of blood already lost was too severe. The hospital declared Stephen dead just before midnight. While Mary Catherine remained in shock, detectives at the scene began observing that her account did not align. There were several physical indications suggesting that something else might have occurred prior to the gunfire. At the same time, the kitchen appeared disorganized. Pieces of food were scattered across the counters and the tiled floor. Several chairs were out of position, and numerous items had fallen off the shelves and lay spread around. It gave the impression of a heated quarrel, potentially involving physical confrontation before the shooting. As officers examined the scene more carefully, they also detected a strong odor of alcohol on Mary Catherine's breath. She spoke in fragmented words that made little sense because she was still overwhelmed. Because of the circumstances, the police decided to bring her to the station for further questioning. She did not resist and left the premises silently with them. Inside the interrogation room, Mary Catherine repeated that the entire incident had been a tragic mishap. She made it clear that she had no intention of harming Stephen in any manner. He had been the most important individual in her life for years, and she insisted there was no possible reason she would deliberately injure him. To reinforce her statement, she explained to police that both she and the victim had always enjoyed guns and shooting activities together. She said they had acquired numerous firearms, though they consistently kept them secured in safety mode and never preloaded them in advance. Mary Catherine emphasized that she was stunned to discover the gun had discharged at all. However, as the interrogation continued, her version of when the weapon fired began to shift. She now asserted that the gun discharged when she tossed it toward Stephen. Observers noted this alteration. Her revised account contrasted with her initial statement at the crime scene, where she had claimed she was merely handing the weapon to him in a regular manner. At present, she alleged that she had thrown it at him. Because of this inconsistency, investigators were forced to reevaluate the case. They recognized that Mary Catherine was accustomed to being around firearms. She worked at a local preschool, but also held a secondary position at a nearby gun shop. Furthermore, Mary Catherine was not merely comfortable with weapons. She had undergone proper training in their use. She claimed that her knowledge of firearms was even superior to Stephen's. As an employee at a gun retail store, she was required to understand every safety regulation regarding the handling and storing of weapons. Consequently, detectives, many of whom had spent years studying firearm safety, found her version increasingly implausible. For someone with official training and employment at a gun store, hurling a loaded weapon across a room was not only reckless but intentional. It endangered both herself and the individual across from her. To them, it was not a frightened impulse. It represented a blatant violation of fundamental safety practices that every firearm user is expected to respect. Based on this assessment, detectives altered their approach. One directly confronted Mary Catherine, telling her plainly that her story was not credible. She was accused of fabricating events, and the inconsistencies were addressed point by point. There was considerable disorder within the kitchen. She smelled strongly of alcohol, and she had already contradicted herself earlier. The tension was instantly apparent. Though the questions became increasingly intense, Mary Catherine broke down sobbing. For investigators, this became the dramatic turning point when she confessed to pulling the trigger in anger. In an unusual twist, her admission coincided with a technical malfunction in the interrogation room. The audio system ceased functioning, though the video kept recording. As a result, the recording failed to capture anything Mary Catherine actually said, including her acknowledgement of firing the gun. It was evident that investigators were frustrated that such a vital piece of evidence would be inadmissible in court. Nevertheless, the investigation proceeded. After being apprehended, Mary Catherine was formally charged with murder. Prosecutors believed sufficient evidence existed to proceed with the case. Alongside physical evidence and an apparent motive, the prosecution relied heavily on her conflicting statements. Based on these elements, investigators concluded Mary Catherine had knowingly pulled the trigger. She worked daily with firearms and often discussed them with expertise. For authorities, her actions that evening were not a temporary lapse in judgment. They were a deliberate decision. Doubts arose concerning the weapon itself. The oil residue inside suggested it had been prepared beforehand rather than carelessly left after a tragic accident. The fact that she had gone to the effort of preparing dinner that night supported their view. Because of her affection, she had cooked Stephen's preferred dish, grilled beef. But within mere minutes, circumstances spiraled out of control. A gunshot rang out, food scattered throughout the kitchen, and Stephen Freeman was gone forever. As the inquiry expanded, a dedicated team reached out to the couple's closest relatives and friends to provide insight into their relationship. Everyone was stunned by Stephen's death, and nearly all expressed the same caution. They could not comprehend that this had occurred, and it was even harder for them to accept Mary Catherine's explanation, given that she was the sole witness to the events. These were not the first occasions Stephen's friends had heard him report that Mary Catherine had pointed a gun at her partner. Over the course of their relationship, she had done this more than once, leaving those around them increasingly alarmed about the growing instability of their relationship. Initially, it appeared that life together was relatively peaceful. They shared a love for nature, enjoyed camping, cared for pets, and developed their bond. Yet matters began unraveling after only a few years. Mary Catherine yelled more frequently, lost her temper rapidly, and often became enraged over trivial issues. These episodes made Stephen feel as if he were suffocating. To regain calm, he often needed to leave the apartment. At one point, he even attempted to block Mary Catherine's number, but she continued calling relentlessly, making it difficult for him to escape the constant strain. This was not only reported by Stephen. Later, one of his co-workers revealed that Mary Catherine had phoned Stephen nearly 30 times before his shift had even started. What was more disturbing was that this was not an isolated occurrence. It happened almost daily. Within the same period, on April 21, 2018, 3 months prior to his death, Stephen texted a friend. In that message, he described Mary Catherine screaming while holding a firearm and running through their apartment, threatening to shoot both of them. The pattern persisted. About 1 month later, Stephen messaged the same friend again to reveal that Mary Catherine had disengaged the gun's safety and racked the slide directly in front of him. She had aimed weapons at him before, but this time felt significantly different. His eyes reflected more than mere anger or fear. What he witnessed convinced him she was genuinely ready to fire. Recognizing the escalating danger, Stephen ended the troubled relationship and relocated to a different city. A supportive friend offered him temporary shelter. Stephen intended to pack his belongings while Mary Catherine was at work so that he could leave without confrontation. His planned departure was set for August 3rd. However, numerous warning signs existed in their relationship before he had the chance to leave. Stephen had never reported Mary Catherine's threats to authorities previously. Yet during their investigation, officers discovered they had been called to the couple's apartment 5 times within a single year. In some instances, the calls concerned loud disputes and domestic disturbances. Still, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged affectionate texts on July 30th, only 2 days before the shooting. They expressed love for one another and wished each other well. But on July 31st, the following day, everything was altered. Stephen had to leave his apartment and stay with a friend for a time because of a fight that turned very bad. All contact with Mary Catherine was cut off. He did not respond to any of her calls or messages. Stephen told his mother clearly that he would never return to that place again. The following day, August 1st, Mary Catherine tried again to reach Stephen. When he did not reply, she prepared dinner herself, hoping that this simple act would bring him back home. Stephen still said nothing and did not return to the apartment. She became angry and called Stephen's mother to ask where he was. During that call, she learned he had stayed the night with a friend named Thomas. Mary Catherine would not accept what was happening, so she got into her car and drove to find him. While driving, she saw Thomas's car with Stephen sitting in the back seat. She pulled up next to it, rolled down her window, and asked if he was coming home. Stephen reluctantly agreed and got into her car after a tense exchange. He was exhausted and wanted to avoid another fight. What he did not realize was that this was the beginning of a carefully planned trap. Back at the apartment, a gun was waiting for him. In the following hours, Stephen Freeman was shot, and hospital staff declared him dead. At that point, a very significant trial began. As the court proceedings opened, the prosecutor argued that Stephen's death was not accidental, but deliberate and cruel. They stated Mary Catherine had made Stephen's favorite meal to lure him back home. But when he did not appear, she became angry instead of saddened. They presented physical evidence to support this claim, including blood and grease stains on the bedsheet and the weapon. Investigators carried out a thorough examination of the crime scene to construct their case. Stains were found on the corner of the bed and nearby areas, indicating Stephen may have been sitting upright when he was shot, then collapsed backward onto the mattress. One by one, friends, relatives, and co-workers testified in court. Each described how unstable Stephen and Mary Catherine's relationship was. According to their testimony, Mary Catherine was often seen as controlling, angry, and frightening to those around her. The lead investigator also highlighted that Mary Catherine had altered her story 6 different times throughout the investigation. Each version was different, with some containing only small adjustments and others changing the story entirely. Jurors developed serious doubts about her reliability because of these inconsistencies. However, the next time Mary Catherine appeared in court, the case took a new direction. She no longer claimed it had been an accident. Instead, she said her actions were taken in self-defense. Her lawyers quickly supported this claim with a completely new narrative. They argued that Stephen Freeman, described by friends as cheerful and pleasant, was actually a very different man in private. The defense alleged Mary Catherine was living with a partner who was abusive, controlling, and jealous. They claimed he dictated what she wore and how she behaved, monitored her spending, and expected her to document every detail of her daily life. Mary Catherine also stated that Stephen struck her on the back of the head and kicked her off the bed, making her hit her head against a doorframe. She said Stephen had sent her 63 pages of angry, offensive, and threatening texts a year earlier, which her defense presented as evidence. These messages, discovered on one of her old phones, were from a short breakup period. This, she said, was why she chose to defend herself in court. Through tears, she described her life with Stephen as an endless cycle of fear, stress, and exhaustion, a living nightmare. She claimed it was her duty every morning to arrange his clothes and shoes exactly the way he liked them. She also testified that Stephen was not allowed to use the bathroom until she had cleaned and prepared it. Mary Catherine told the judge Stephen frequently accused her of cheating, which led to heated arguments that escalated. To support this account, her lawyer presented several text messages they said came from Stephen. In one, he threatened to come home and punish her if she brought up his private life again. That night, he messaged her that he missed her and would return. He added that he would take her to what he called the Red Room. Mary Catherine testified that the Red Room was not an actual place, but a phrase he used to describe nights when he allegedly beat and restrained her in different rooms of the house. She cried as she said Stephen forced her to have sex twice, even though she made it clear she did not consent. Despite her refusals, he continued. She stated that one of those incidents occurred shortly after they came back from a trip to Disneyland. According to her, Stephen told her that because he had spent a large amount of money on the trip, she owed him and must do as he wished, even though she resisted. He then forced her despite her protests. Mary Catherine testified that what occurred on August 1st was not due to anger, but fear that had built up over time. That night, she told Stephen she no longer wanted to be with him. She described his response as explosive. He struck her and threw the meal she had prepared. Mary Catherine said that was the moment she pulled out the gun and told him to leave the apartment. When asked to recount the final moments before Stephen was shot, she said he charged at her, was struck instantly, and then asked her to call for help. She maintained that she never intended to harm or kill him, as everything happened so suddenly. But detectives grew doubtful. In all her earlier interrogations, Mary Catherine had never once mentioned Stephen attacking or harming her. That omission became a critical point in the prosecution's argument. They emphasized that Mary Catherine had never reported abuse during her initial cooperation with police. No medical evidence existed to show she had been injured, and no police reports corroborated her claims of violence. In response to the prosecutor's questions, Mary Catherine said she once believed she was to blame for her boyfriend's aggression. She explained to the judge that she had lied about their relationship before out of shame. But this explanation was challenged when the prosecution presented an unexpected piece of evidence. Mary Catherine's phone browser history revealed she had visited adult websites with violent material only hours before the shooting. These searches were conducted while she was working as a babysitter. Prosecutors questioned whether someone claiming abuse would willingly seek out such material. Mary Catherine answered that people misunderstood her actions. She insisted she visited those sites not out of personal interest, but to satisfy Stephen's desires. The defense shifted focus, presenting patterns typical of individuals in violent relationships to support their claim she had been abused. An expert witness testified her behavior aligned with symptoms of battered woman syndrome. The prosecution, however, countered that Mary Catherine showed no definitive psychological signs of trauma. Even after these arguments, prosecutors remained unconvinced about Mary Catherine's conduct on the day of the shooting. The defense pointed out she had said she wanted to end the relationship, but also noted she repeatedly called Stephen that day. She cooked his favorite dinner, then went to a friend's apartment to persuade him to return when he stayed away. They argued these actions were reconciliatory, not hostile. One of the key pieces of evidence, the police interrogation tape of Mary Catherine, could not be used in court because its audio was missing. Although it was believed she confessed on the recording, her precise words could not be verified. Additionally, there were serious problems with the handling of the gun. Officers admitted placing the weapon in a paper bag to prevent Mary Catherine from harming herself, but they failed to record its original location or photograph the scene before moving it. These lapses in evidence collection and protocol had a major effect on the outcome of the trial. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with a tense verdict. Mary Catherine Higdon was acquitted of all charges. Later, some jurors explained that while they suspected she may have killed Stephen, the prosecution had not proven her guilt beyond reasonable doubt. As a result, Mary Catherine was freed from jail on June 26, 2019. But for those who loved Stephen Freeman, the verdict was heartbreaking. They believe justice is more than following legal procedures. It is also about giving truth to the family. Most importantly, Stephen's mother refused to remain silent. Since her son's death, she has become a strong advocate for campaigns raising awareness of domestic abuse. She stresses that abuse is not always easy to recognize, and victims are not always women. Men can also suffer. They can be mistreated, beaten, or constantly terrorized. She makes clear that abuse does not recognize gender. For that reason, Stephen Freeman's name should be remembered as part of that truth. Even though the legal decision is final, the case continues to be discussed. Unanswered questions remain. Pieces of evidence were overlooked, and hidden aspects never fully revealed. All of it continues to weigh heavily on the victim's family and the community. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.